Thank you, Sheriff. I'll start by a round of questions, and then we'll turn to Senator Durbin. Mr. Puerta, Ms. Noring, I think it's only appropriate that we should express our condolences for your loss. You know, when things like this happen, I usually try to figure out, well, is there any way we can take something terrible and tragic and hopefully learn some lessons and make things better and save lives in the future? And so thank you for being courageous and telling your story. I know it's not easy, but it's very important for people across this country to understand how this can happen to them and their family. And having visited with a number of families in Texas, its various school districts, I've come to believe that this requires a layered approach, maybe starting at the kitchen table with awareness of our children to the threat, because none of them take these counterfeit drugs knowingly, at least knowing that it will take their lives, that it contains a contaminated fentanyl. But I do believe it's going to require all of us, from parents, families, to school districts and local law enforcement, state and federal law enforcement, and border security. Mr. Sheriff Barnes, it's my understanding that most of the chemicals that go into fentanyl basically have been traced back to China. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Senator, there is an issue with precursor chemicals transiting from China through our U.S. ports and directly to China, yes.
And as I understand some of the announcements relating to the tariffs that President Trump has announced, his administration has said this isn't so much a trade policy as it is an anti-fentanyl policy to finally get the Chinese government's attention to do something about the precursors that emanate from that country. But then, as you point out, they make their way to Mexico, where the cartels are putting them into pill presses and making them look like relatively innocuous drugs, only to turn out to be contaminated with fentanyl and take the lives of people unbeknownst to them. Do you believe that with improved border security, we can begin to stop some of the flow of the illicit drugs coming across the border, including fentanyl?
Yes, Senator. What you described is a very complex system, almost a supply chain that starts in China, using transit, going to Mexico, the pill presses. It's not doing any one thing. It's doing 12 things simultaneously. So I do believe that addressing this issue is much more complicated than just any one thing. The HALT Act is a great start. But when you look at the pill presses, pressing pills, that's one issue. The border obviously is going to be the most significant issue as we shut down the border and the pathway for illicit fentanyl to make its way back into the United States. But it's that and many other things that have to take place.
So I heard Senator Durbin's statement, which I disagree with, that says that the vast majority of the fentanyl comes across the ports of entry transported by American citizens. Is there anybody on the panel who subscribes to that point of view? Dr. Farfan, do you think any one of the 1.7 million gotaways during the last 4 years have been transporting fentanyl?
1.7 million of?
Well, during the Biden administration, out of the millions of people that were welcomed into the country and released, there were 1.7 million that appeared on various sensors, cameras and things like that evaded law enforcement and made their way into the interior of the United States. Do you think any one of those 1.7 million individuals that were evading law enforcement were transporting fentanyl?
I mean, to restate what I mentioned in my testimony, data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission shows that 86.4 people sentenced for fentanyl trafficking in fiscal year 2023 were U.S. citizens.
And that's not my question.
I would also
add... My question is about the people who evaded law enforcement. Is it possible that some of them, or maybe even many of them, were transporting illicit drugs, including fentanyl?
As someone who studies organized crime, that would be a really bad business decision. Drug traffickers deal with a lot of...
It sounds to me like a very profitable decision on the part of the cartels to evade law enforcement and to be able to deliver your drugs, your load into the United States, only to make a lot of money from it. Why is that a bad business decision?
Because from a business point of view, you would prefer to have smugglers who have a legal right to entry into the United States than an immigrant who is uncertain whether or not he or she is going to cross into the United States. So if you're looking at it from the point of view of, will we turn a profit or not in this particular shipment, putting your shipment in the hands of an immigrant who does not have a legal right to entry into the U.S. is actually a bad business decision.
Sheriff Barnes, you agree with that?
I do not. There's two different facets here. You have the trafficking of the narcotic, which is oftentimes in large bulk. In our experience in intervention and interdiction, as those are oftentimes residents of Mexico, the distribution of that or sales of it, I think to Dr. Farfan's point, might oftentimes be carried out by U.S. citizens in the drug trafficking market. So it's a combination of both. But the vast majority of the large quantities coming across, has been my experience, are being conducted by Mexican nationals. The distribution and sales inside the continental United States oftentimes has been carried out by U.S. citizens.
Thank you.